Disclaimer: even though research has been done for specific cases and data was gathered to bring numbers to the table, most of this video is the opinion about the state of horror nowadays, from the perspective of a person who has played countless horror games and watched way too many horror movies. Before trying to dismantle my theories in the comments section, please try to finish the whole video and remember that your opinion and mine are not universal nor objective, otherwise they would be called facts. If you're not a scaredy cat, chances are that at some point of your lives you've watched a good horror movie or played an amazing horror game and you said, okay, I want more of this sensation. After all, fear, as negative as the word sounds, is actually a good thing if you have the guts to go through it. When we find ourselves in a fight or flight situation, our brain releases two important chemicals that help us confront the threatening situation: cortisol and adrenaline. These two just so happen to be a natural counter to depression and anxiety. So yeah, fear is good, people. Anyway, going back to the situation I previously mentioned, you've played an excellent horror game and you want more. What are the odds of finding one that will satisfy you as much as the previous game? The hard truth is, the odds are very low. There are multiple reasons for that, and we will tackle some of them today, namely getting used to feeling afraid, age, and last but not least, the incompetence of horror game developers. Let's start with getting used to fear. As we interact with things in our lives, things that used to cause us a certain feeling suffer a massive degradation. Think of it as taking drugs. The first time you do it, it hits you like a truck. But then, once you transform into an experimented person on the matter, the dose you used to consume suddenly is not enough, and you need more to relive the first feeling you had. Now, let's apply the same idea to life. Your sense of humor evolves. Things that used to make you laugh 10 years ago possibly won't make you laugh anymore. And things that used to excite you, for instance getting your first paycheck, now is just one more. And unfortunately, horror is not immune to time and memory. As you play one horror game, and another, and yet another, and one more, you discover the tropes, you find patterns, you identify the cliches. Why is it so calm all of a sudden? You already know a jump scare is coming. Gore also does not affect you as it did before because you become more resistant to these limbs being dismembered, beheadings, and whatnot. So, what can we do to avoid this? Sadly, my take is that there is no real solution to it. Horror games tend to be very scripted, since most of them are single players. So, unless higher difficulties switch enemy placements or add new enemies, like Resident Evil 7's Madhouse difficulty, you'll never experience it again like you did the first time. That is obvious. What about single-player open-world games such as Dying Light? For me, there was only one enemy that made me feel very uneasy the first time I played that gem. You guessed it right, the volatile. And partially, that happens mainly because they come out at night. Think of a chase with a volatile on broad daylight. Not so scary anymore, are you? Well, let's get back because I'm going around the bush with this one. Why did I mention Dying Light? Because even a terrifying creature such as the volatile cannot hold its own against the player getting used to the mechanics, and of course, character progression. Crane is a one-man army at 2/3 of the game, so you don't really feel as threatened as you did when all was fresh at the beginning. What about Dead by Daylight, where 4 survivors must escape a trial by repairing 5 generators and avoid getting sacrificed by a killer? It is multiplayer. All 5 characters in the trial are real online people, so it can't be scripted. Yeah, but again, you can still get used to it, just a different type of getting used to. In Resident Evil 4 Remake, you know that the infected dog is there, so you approach the location cautiously and prepared for him to jump in subsequent playthroughs. In Dead by Daylight, your fear disappears by getting to know every killer's powers and understanding the gameplay loop, which is very simplistic at its core. You run the killer around the pallet loops and repair generators, mostly. By the time you get these things down, the only things that can catch you off guard in this game and scare you are the silent killers, such as the pig, Ghostface, and maybe an Evil Within one Myers. And all of these boil down to a measly jump scare. which is the most basic and effortless way of scaring someone. I don't even call it horror nowadays. Let's talk about age now, which shouldn't take long to wrap up. You don't have to be a genius to find out children are easier to be scared than teenagers or adults, and that is completely natural. They lack the experience in life and even the maturity to distinguish what's real and what is fiction. I still remember being 8 and playing Area 51 in my PlayStation 2 and thinking, holy shit, is that what they have in the real Area 51 in USA? We are fucked. Oh my god, I hope these things never get out of there. It blew my mind because I was on top of the whole alien conspiracy and experiments done to extraterrestrial organisms in those facilities. So that game made me believe it even more. But then, all of that changes when we grow up and see the world as just a boring corporate piece of shit with no fantastic elements in it whatsoever. Sometimes, that is for the best though. I wouldn't want to live in The Witcher's world, for instance, and have to worry about my life 24/7. With age also comes knowledge, and you suddenly find that the black guy often dies first in the movies. And you find that there is always a bully or asshole archetype in every horror drama for teenagers. And oh god, the grumpiness. More often than not, the older you get, the less bullshit you can take. And when you see that every fucking time the protagonist decides to split up, to cover more terrain, or one fucker decides to go to the basement by himself, you just say, fuck it, and start rooting for the killer to murder all of them. In my case, that happened a lot to me with slasher movies such as Halloween and Friday 13th. Let's go, Mikey boy, stab their asses. Now, for the last, longest and most controversial point, incompetent and greedy developers. Pure horror games are a rare breed of a gaming genre nowadays, and that is because the horror genre is quite niche. Why should I keep creating horror titles and not reach the expected profits from my company and investors when I can develop a horror/action title and appeal to a bigger audience? That is just how things were, have, and will be, as sad as it sounds. Why was Resident Evil 6 such a huge failure?
Whoa, okay, calm down. Let me explain it. So what do I mean by saying that Resident Evil 6 was a huge failure? Of course, I'm not speaking profit-wise, because it is like the third best-selling Resident Evil game of all time, behind Resident Evil 7 and 2. So yep, they made a lot of money from it. Just so you see how profitable the action market is, they pretty much disappointed their whole fanbase, the horror fanbase, and they still made a lot of money out of it. So yeah, I'm speaking horror-wise, because that game is pretty much Call of Duty on steroids, in third person, because there's no real horror in it. It is only present partially in Leon's campaign and Ada's campaign a little bit, but yeah, Chris's campaign and Jake's campaign are just team deathmatch against the Javo zombies who shoot guns and rocket launchers and whatever back at you. It's crazy.
Because Capcom got greedy and tried to push the franchise way too much into action, and their roof collapsed on their heads. Same thing happened with Umbrella Corps. Capcom, why in the bloody hell are you trying to make a competitive shooter out of the Resident Evil universe? Are you stupid? Why are you trying to compete against Dead by Daylight with that Resident Evil 3 extra mode? We already know the Resident Evil universe doesn't fit in multiplayer. Why try to create a team deathmatch with mutation and other shenanigans in Resident Evil verse? Because money. It is impossible to please the public. Gamers are whiny douchebags most of the times, and they can't clear their minds on what they want. I am saying that because we had an excellent horror game in Resident Evil 7, and some quote-unquote players complains that it was too scary, which made Capcom tone down the horror for Resident Evil Village. And that is why the only truly horrifying moment in the game is in the Benevientos house, while the rest of the game is rather more action-sided than anything else. Just watch these clips in the background and swear on your mom's name that you would say this is Resident Evil, in case you knew nothing about the franchise, of course. That is what I thought. I still really like the game though. It's just that those Michael Bay type of movie scenes don't really blend with the IP, in my opinion. Sure, you can have one or two here and there of these moments, but Resident Evil 8 hunger for kabooms and kapows is way too much. Now that we are done bashing a successful franchise, let's talk about another situation. Why was Dead Space 3 such a piece of shit compared to the first one? Because the first one was mainly horror. Sadly, Visceral Games, the developers, did not get as much profit as they wanted out of the project, and the almighty corporate greedy scum that is Electronic Arts, the publisher of that IP, wanted more money. So they pushed the game and the genre heavily into action. Yet another franchise ruined by Electronic Arts, ladies and gentlemen. No matter how much shit's up to your neck, never make a deal with the devil. Moreover, I believe that the unavoidable progress in gameplay damages the horror essence badly. If you think about it, in recent years, what game has been the icon and the reference of fear? Hell, it wasn't even a full game, it was a demo, and that's playable teaser, short PT. One of the biggest losses this world has ever experienced was not the downfall of cryptocurrency, nor the appearance of characters such as Andrew Tate and Logan Paul, but how PT was thrown to garbage and never resurrected. That demo was huge, so much so that PS4s that still have it installed are being sold for more than $1,000 nowadays, because the game cannot be downloaded anymore. And think about it, it was simplistic as hell. You spawn in a room, enter a hallway from a house, you have an L-shaped corridor and a bathroom that isn't even open most of the times, which leaves you only with the L-shaped corridor. It should be called a walk around your home simulator while your mom desperately chases you around to do your chores, and people will be chill with it. In all seriousness, every time I think about the interactions with Lisa, especially that one where she peeks at us from the balcony, the eerie soundtrack, the shadows projections at the end of the hallway because of the lightning, the radio broadcasts saying that the daughter was lured and killed by her dad, everything is simply perfection. It was so simplistic that all your character could do is walk and zoom his camera, nothing else. This way you were fully focused on what's going on around you. You are powerless because you can't fight back. You have no idea what Lisa can do. Why is there a fetus in the sink? Nothing was explained, and that's when us humans feel most powerless, when we know nothing, and thus we can't find a solution to deal with the problem. Some games get this right. For instance, the regenerator in Resident Evil 4 is an incredible example of why leaving the player in the dark is an excellent idea for horror games, no matter if you do it at the beginning, halfway through, or at the end of the game. An important key in the horror genre is to subvert players' expectations. In the island section, we start seeing heavily trained zombies that can use military weapons and strategize to a minimum. So what is the last thing we expect to happen? A break from that action segment into a close quarters dark hospital environment facing a new type of enemy that resembles nothing we have seen before. And to top that, a new mechanic where our enemy is near immortal unless we shoot specific plagas inside of his body, which we can't see at first because we need a thermoscope. So we are at a disadvantage, and after figuring that out, the best thing we can do is run. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the first time in the whole game where running away is the best option, at probably 5 hours shy from finishing the game. Lack of knowledge is one thing, but another completely different thing that some horror games benefit a lot from are subpar graphics. Can you imagine if Amnesia made use of the Unreal Engine? I don't think it would be as scary as it is because it wouldn't fit the theme of the game. Games that represent decay, loss of sanity, depression, and a trip into the unknown, such as Silent Hill and Evil Within 2, can be terrifically horrifying if done correctly. And even though these two partially belong to the same genre, Silent Hill has climbed to the top of the survival horror not because it has been in the industry longer, but because the artistic direction of the game is very accurate when it comes to choosing the artistic style of the game. Evil Within 2, as good as it is way too colorful and realistic for its own sake, graphics-wise of course, and that damages some situations that would be horrifying if realism was more controlled. Remember that our mind is our worst enemy sometimes. You don't feel fear of the dark until you start speculating what's in it. If the game doesn't give our brains room to speculate about abstract things, we won't feel much. And that is a shame because we don't really have to see things to feel them. It is like developers have suddenly forgotten that a good horror game is not particularly about jump scares, but also world building, atmosphere, enemy design, soundtrack, the elements that lead us to the tension-packed moments, amongst many others. I think that successful indie horror games such as Slender Man, and Five Nights at Freddy's have hurt the industry despite how good they were back in the day and still are right now for some people, mainly due to the nature of jump scares. Even if terror in those games wasn't fully centered around an abrupt high-volume key or an abrupt event to startle the audience, it was there the player knew he fucked up moment. What is the problem with relying heavily on these moments? They are incredibly cheap for starters, and even though these two examples were well done because there was a huge build-up behind them, some other games started not to even bother with a build-up and throw a jump scare out of nowhere. And you know what happens with bad practices in successful games. They get spread around better than COVID. It happened with Assassin's Creed Vantage Points and Far Cry Towers, online gambling for loot, aka loot boxes. Once an unscrupulous company that has gone stale sees an idea that is going viral from their competition, first thing they do is try to recreate it in their own games. And here we go, jump scares galore, even in games that are not horror games. So, it sucks if abused because it is cheesy, and secondly, it raises someone's guard. Think of it this way. We have a guard that we lower to enjoy the movie or the game. We partially raise it when we feel on edge in tense moments, but we only flinch, jump, scream when we get a good jump scare. Now, I'm 99% sure that any following jump scares won't be as effective anymore, because you expect them to come. And movies like It, 2, for instance, suffer from that a lot because it is filled with those moments, and I swear on God that I even managed to perfectly do a countdown of when they were going to happen in that movie, just because of how many there were and how predictable they were also. I feel like I've gone way too far off topic, but I also feel like I had to get many of these things about the horror industry off my chest. As I was writing the script, I thought, I can't end the video without recommending some kick-ass horror games for the viewers. Not everything is black after all. There are still some amazing horror and psychological horror games out there that people can try to play if they want to get that "dudes, this is way too much for me" sensation. Warning, I won't mention the obvious ones such as Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Outlast, Little Nightmares, yada yada, because you already know them, so the list would be pointless. For this one, we'll dive deeper than what the surface has to offer us. Cry of Fear narrates the story of Simon, a teenager who has to move around a Swedish town all by himself while experiencing nightmarish encounters and having to make dreadful decisions to continue moving forwards in this depressive and scary path. It is played in first person for that sweet immersion, and what I mentioned previously about subpar graphics making a game better is exceptionally applicable here. I can't think of the sadness and looming terror of this game being transmitted to the player through amazing textures, shaders, and a colorful palette. If they ever release it for consoles, I hope it is just a port with some changes to the game's quality of life, and that's it. The thing I love the most about it is that the game is pretty damn hard, like, it does not hold your hand. You have difficult puzzles, labyrinthic levels such as the apartments in the woods. The reloading mechanic is realistic since all bullets left in the magazine are wasted if you reload your gun, and your carrying capacity is very limited, so you have to choose wisely what to take and what not to. The most incredible thing about this game is that it was a mod from Half-Life 1, or at least it started this way, so it wasn't even an original game at first. You can play it with 3 friends, maximum, in case going in there alone proves to be too much for you to handle. It has an excellent melancholic, nostalgic soundtrack that follows the depression theme perfectly, kind of reminiscent of Silent Hill. And the creatures. Oh man, the creatures. Fucking hell. Sometimes I had to stop playing because I thought my heart was going to burst. Good times. And you can do all of that for free. Darkwood is a survival horror game which puts us in the shoes of a person who wants to escape from a seemingly polished forest that traps people inside of it. In there, you'll find many characters to interact with, and decides the fate of some of them, and see many grotesque things as a whole. Additionally, it has a very original trait. It uses a kind of camera that allows the player to see things from above. Before playing that gem, I had never thought this style would suit a horror game, because I was used to the typical fixed angles, first or third person. As you can see, graphics are far from realistic, which again, like I said before, is something completely positive for this game's aim, because let me tell you, that shit is scary. How can you induce fear if the camera is so far away, thus not allowing you to see the enemies from up close and witnessing the monstrosity's details? The answer is by creating a terrifying environment and chilling special effects / soundtrack. Darkwood is all about exploring the map, gathering loot, interacting with NPCs, and doing quests during daytime. When sun's about to set, boy, you better haul ass back to your hideout, because you don't want to find yourself out there during the night. Once you return to your shack, you have to survive the night. Creatures start attacking your place, and as the game progresses, new types of enemies appear and attacks start to feel more relentless. You must move furniture around your room to complicate their pathing, put bear traps and other stuff around the hideout, and try to keep those lamps and that oven on, for Christ's sake, otherwise you are fucked. Obviously, this game is not about jump scares, but keeping players on the edge of their seats during the excruciatingly long night. And I'm not even exaggerating, have you ever done a plank? They are supposed to last for a minute, but I swear it feels like 10 minutes. So the same here, a night lasts 4 minutes and a half, but I swear it feels like 20. The game does an incredible job at making you feel uneasy by giving the character very limited vision at night. Remember what I said about letting our imagination flow and speculate what's in the dark? That is exactly what it does when you see furniture around the house moving but you don't really know what's pushing it. Oh my god, no, Yuri has gone full otaku. Go get a shower, man, touch grass, lols. Shut the fuck up and listen for a second. I am positive that this game chose the anime style and that title to catch people off guard with its hidden psychological horror / disturbing formula. It is very original, since what do you expect from a 2D narrative novel done by an indie studio, where you just choose dialogues and options that affect the plot? Well, you don't expect much, but here we are with people in a subreddit offering comfort for others who have played the game because of its depressively disturbing narrative and how it breaks the fourth wall, which makes the story more believable. I won't say much else, like I did for the other two, because I can't speak much on it without spoilers, since the gameplay is very basic, and I would need to talk about the story in order to continue making commentary on it. It is free to play, but I do recommend people who enjoy the game and have the means to leave a good review and make a small donation if you can to the studio for what they have accomplished. After all, we have to support small creators however we can, since we want them to get the recognition they deserve. There is nothing in this world that fucks with my mental sanity harder than talentless or uninspiring people or studios getting all the attention and talented people who can offer a lot to the community getting left in the dark. Thank you for watching.